welcome to today's panel on doing business in the 252 billion supplements market. You'll have to forgive us, we were having a bit of a giggle as a group before we went live, so it's why we've had a slightly informal beginning, but really excited to have you all with us today, and looking forward to hearing so much input from our wonderful panel. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to your moderator today, James Bauly from DSM. James, over to you.
Thanks, Angela, and welcome everybody to this panel. It's a great pleasure to be here. So my name's James, as Angela mentioned. I'm leading the personalized nutrition business at DSM, and today, however, I will be acting as your moderator and facilitator in this panel, and we're going to be exploring what it means to be doing business in dietary supplements right now. I'm going to hand over to our panelists in a second to allow them to introduce themselves. But really, just at the beginning, please, let's keep this, as interactive as possible. So do send your questions in. And the overarching theme that we'd like to sort of share with you and discuss today is, how is doing business in this market? How's it evolving? And obviously, that's a hot topic, particularly in the current context. What are the big changes on the horizon that we're dealing with? So before we get stuck into the questions, I'll open it up to the panel to introduce themselves. I'm going to go through who appears first on my screen. And so Rob, that means you get the short straw to go first, and please introduce yourself, and then we'll hand over. Thanks.
Hi everybody, I'm Rob Fried, and I'm the CEO of ChromaDex. I've worked at ChromaDex now for 4 years as an executive. I've been the CEO for 3 years. I've been on the board of ChromaDex for 6 years. Prior to ChromaDex, I founded and ran a series of companies that were mostly in digital media and in media. Interestingly, I started my career in the entertainment business. I was actually a motion picture producer. And I ran the Columbia Pictures movie division in a movie studio called Savoy Pictures. Some of the films that I produced at that time were Godzilla and Collateral and Boondock Saints and Rudy, a football film here in the US. And I was honored to win an Oscar and an Emmy during my period there.
Wow.
ChromaDex has been around for about 20 years. It initially started as a reference standards business and analytical testing business. Later added a consulting business and of course an ingredient business. One of the ingredients that ChromaDex developed, they built a nice strong patent portfolio around, as well as getting regulatory approvals around the world, was this ingredient called nicotinamide riboside, which many of you know is probably, the science suggests, the best precursor to nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, NAD, which is relevant to Healthspan, as we know. We know that NAD declines with age. We know that NAD plays a vital role as a coenzyme to almost all metabolic processes, but particularly the repair of cells and energy metabolism. So it goes to show that if there's a clean, simple, efficient, and cost-effective way to elevate NAD, you're going to strengthen the cells, you're going to improve the cell's ability to repair damage, create energy, and improve health span. So upon recognition that ChromaDex had this asset in place, we just strategy towards a more consumer-facing strategy, less of a B2B business and more of a consumer-facing enterprise. That's when I joined the company. We launched our consumer brand, True Niagen, in March of 2017, happens to be coincide with when I joined the company. And that's really been the primary focus of the enterprise ever since I've been there. Our sales are mostly e-commerce driven. Although we do now sell at retail in Hong Kong and in Singapore and Macau, now in the UK and super drug stores. We recently announced a deal with Walmart, so we will be expanding our retail presence, but the vast majority of our sales are through our website and through Amazon, which is a core expertise of the company ChromaDex now, in addition to its historical expertise in, obviously, in science.
Thanks, Rob. Really appreciate the introduction. Looking forward to tapping into your very, very diverse experience as well. So thank you for that. Kate, if I could hand over to you, please.
Yeah, thanks, James. So I'm Kate Bache. I'm the CEO of a company called Health and Her. And Health and Her provides innovative supplements and digital support to menopausal women, of which there are millions and millions entering every week into that category. My background is actually originally a chemist turned FMCG marketeer and innovator. So about 15 years in the industry for companies, blue chip companies like Reckitt Benckiser, Kellogg's and PepsiCo. And this is my second startup company. So Health and Her is only 2 years old, actually, but already working with leading retailers in the UK to distribute our quite disruptive supplement range. We also operate online, so quite a significant proportion of our sales are through our e-commerce channels. And we also have an accompanying menopause app. And it's actually the app and the supplement that is a system that works together that we're quite proud of as our kind of flagship product. So we have the UK's first perimenopause supplement that's widely distributed. And we also have a multi-symptom menopause supplement, and both are supported by the free app. Our products are very data kind of driven. So we have built a data set of more than 100,000 women. And that's growing rapidly through both our website and our app. And data is really at the core of everything that we do. And we have an arm that is very much future focused on women and menopausal outcomes beyond just the period of time that you experience a lot of symptoms. So, for example, we're now working with a neuroscientist at local university and trying to really use a lot of the data that we've collected to drive more understanding about the link with menopause and dementia. So we have a quite strong data arm as well in the business.
Fantastic, Kate. Thank you. Thanks so much for that. Look forward to learning a bit more. It's a very passionate subject, and like the new directions that it's taking as well. Thank you. And Colin, I think you're next on my screen. Could I hand over to you, please? Brilliant.
Great. So I'm really happy to be here. I am the CEO of Juvenescence Life, which is the consumer division of Juvenescence. From my background, I started at Johnson & Johnson about 30 years ago in their consumer healthcare division, running their OTC businesses, ran brands like Tylenol, Imodium, Lactaid. Eventually, got tapped to set up the Nutritionals division of J&J, launched Splendid worldwide, Benecol, a variety of other products. And then I moved over to run the OTC division, the over-the-counter drug division, McNeil, where we acquired the Pfizer consumer healthcare business, sort of combined the two to make the largest OTC business in the world. Decided to take a step away from big pharma and went to Campbell's to run the soup division for a couple of years, then went to Walgreens as their chief innovation officer, Weight Watchers to lead up innovation and healthcare. And then just before this job, I was tapped as the CEO of the Vitamin Shop in the United States, which was the second largest, probably the broadest diversified specialty retailer in the supplement market for 3.5 years. 2 years ago, I met Greg Bauly, who was one of our founders at Juvenescence. And I was just very impressed by the amount of homework that the three founders had done, looking at the longevity and health span space, and a very diversified point of view about the opportunity to build a regeneration division, an RX division, an AI machine learning division, and brought me on board to basically build out a consumer division for the market. So we are focused on supplements, medical foods, and functional foods, all geared towards healthy living and healthy aging. And our mission really is what we call reimagining a lifetime, really helping consumers as more and more boomers and others get to the years where they're starting to focus on what they can do to extend health span and actually have a better quality of life for the back half of their life. We're developing a variety of different therapeutics, in my case, consumer therapeutics, that can be utilized. I'm excited because literally 2 weeks ago, we got GRAS approval for our first product, Metabolic Switch. This panel will have a lot of metabolism conversations, I'm noting, given everybody's background on this piece. But this is a ketone ester product that we're bringing initially to the US market and then worldwide. It'll rival any other ketone ester product in the market at this point, and frankly has probably the best clinical study background of anything that's in the marketplace right now. And so very excited about getting that to market, and we've got several other compounds that we're planning to introduce over the next several years.
Colin, thanks. Really appreciate it. Great intro, and obviously very on theme for this conference and today's panel as well. So appreciate it. Thanks. And you, last but not least, just hand over to you for a short intro as well. Thanks.
Great. Hi everyone. I am Cheng from Nestlé Health Science. As you know, Nestlé Health Science is a healthcare division of Nestlé. We are a fast-growing company. Global leader in nutrition and supplements. Within Nestlé Health Science, I am responsible for the metabolic health business, which include our weight management, active nutrition, and specialty nutrition products for diabetes and cardiovascular diseases. Before this role, I was the head of strategy for Nestlé Health Science, working on corporate strategy, portfolio strategy, business development, licensing, and strategic initiatives. So totally with Nestlé about 6 years. Prior to Nestlé, I spent most of my career in the pharma industry across multiple roles: marketing, sales, strategy, business development, licensing, and R&D. I've also worked as a strategy consultant at McKinsey for a few years, supporting senior executives in the pharma and biotech, payers, providers, and consumer packaged good industries. I am a scientist by training and still consider myself a scientist by heart. Very excited to be part of the panel today and look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, you. Appreciate, and that remark on the science also resonates, I think, across the panel. I think we all share that passion. I'm blown away by the diversity of experience we have with us today for the conversation. So really looking forward to it. And let's dig in. And like I said at the beginning, really want to explore, the changes and the evolution in the supplements market for Healthspan. And obviously these days, we can't really avoid talking about COVID. It's why we're on a virtual call today and not in person. And maybe just start by framing the conversation in that context a little bit, and specifically, what do you see in your line of business as have been the main consequences and an impact of COVID, and perhaps even, dare I say, opportunities that are arising through it? And you, maybe, if you wouldn't mind, we start with you, obviously representing a large consumer-facing conglomerate. Really be curious to hear your perspective on that to begin with.
Sure. I can kick it off. So certainly, the COVID pandemic has a big impact in the health and wellness, vitamins and supplement industry. If you look at the historic data, the VMS sales during the SARS crisis in 2003 and H1N1 pandemic in 2009, there was increased focus in health, which drove demand, and then it came back down to the baseline level. So the trend is similar with COVID, as we observe over the past year. VMS growth has more than doubled over the past year, and the health halo effect is bigger given the scale and duration of COVID. More consumers are focusing on health and wellness, self-care, which is the buzzword over the past year. And we expect the positive impact to be much longer than the prior crisis. And certainly this depends on how long COVID will last. But if you go down to the specific segments and channels, the impact is different. Immunity is a huge beneficiary of COVID. All the supplements that helps improve immunity, improve stress relief, improve sleep, all benefiting from this pandemic. Within our business, the weight management, we were negatively impacted initially because weight management is not relevant, not the most relevant at the beginning of the confinement period. And then it rebounded after the restrictions are lifted. And some consumers, because they stay at home, there's this kind of COVID-15, people gain weight and they want to lose some weight after that. So it really depends on the specific category, but overall for the VMS industry, we benefited from the COVID effect. And I think there's definitely increased focus on health and wellness among all the consumers.
Right.
And this is going to probably have a little bit of a long tail effect,
Exactly.
depending how long COVID lasts.
Exactly. No, thanks you. And I've heard that resonate. That resonates with what I've heard from others about this. Yeah, it seems to be potentially really a sustainable increase in health awareness and self-health, as you say. I'd like to maybe just build on that a little bit now, and Kate, just give you a chance to reflect on, from a, you're obviously offering a digital proposition amongst others, and how does that play into the current situation? And did you see a particular, what kind of impacts did you see specifically around the digital proposition?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have two kind of digital products that sit alongside our supplements. One is a simple menopause tool, which is on the website, and the other is the app. Yeah, absolutely saw more and more usage of those. And I think an interesting dynamic amongst our consumer group, or our women in particular going through menopause, is I think women perceive menopause as not such a critical thing to go to their GP with in normal circumstances, but even more so in COVID. So very reluctant to put extra strain and pressure on their local doctor. And so we definitely saw much more kind of self-care and trying to find solutions which meant that they could avoid that trip to their local doctor. But yeah, from an e-commerce perspective, huge part of our business, we also benefited hugely. I think just obviously people were really forced into shopping online.
Yeah.
I think interestingly for us as well, we have the dynamic of working a lot with retail. And I think here in the UK in particular, grocers did particularly well in the pandemic, and we have some good distribution there. So kind of benefiting from both sides, I suppose, overall. But yeah, some interesting dynamics, particularly amongst the mindset of women.
Yeah, very interesting. Thanks, Kate. Really appreciate that. And what I want to do now is maybe from that kind of slightly broader perspective on a digital kind of holistic offering, Rob and Colin, dare I say, you sort of perhaps look at it more from a product development, ingredient lens. How have you experienced that? Maybe Colin first, hand over to you to reflect a little bit on that and your experience.
Yeah, I mean, I'll bounce back to my previous experience before this job, being head of a big retailer. Kate made the point about the acceleration of digital penetration. That really can't be understated. I mean, you had a trajectory in the supplement category, particularly in the US, typically, depending on the source, 10 to 15% of sales going digitally. I think most of the sources I've read have suggested that penetration has doubled, if not tripled, in critical supplement categories. And so suddenly you're going to see this shift as we come out of this. I'm sure there's going to be some of it that's going to go back to bricks and mortar, but the reality is that the action is going to move online. And the category thought for a long period of time it was even shielded from the Amazons of the world and others. The reality is we're now going to be full force. DTC brands like Kate's are going to do quite well in that kind of environment. And I think the interesting thing about Kate's model, which is part of what we're looking at our model as well, is the unique capability of developing a digital service capability alongside the product.
Got it.
A disruptive way to think about it, and frankly, a way that today's consumer wants to consume it. The other thing that I think is going to be interesting reverberation out of this is going to be what's going to happen with the healthcare professional. There is a large piece of the population, particularly the elderly, who have been essentially denying themselves and or felt denied the ability to connect with the healthcare professional. I was on a call last week with the CEO of AARP, and she said that the level of digital training amongst the seniors has advanced much faster than anything they've done in the last 10 years, just because people have had to get used to using Zoom. And as a result, things like teledoc and the ability to take telehealth medicine input is through the roof. So I wouldn't be surprised as well if you don't start to see more and more companies and consumers pivot more towards, I wouldn't say disintermediating the physician, because I think the physician will always play an important role, but I think a different type of a relationship with the healthcare professional coming to market. And for product developers, I'm sure Rob's thinking about this, everybody on this call's probably thinking about this. I just think it blows open the value proposition.
Right.
I think it's no longer a question of, do I have the best ingredient? It's really a question of, do I have the opportunity to bring the best value proposition and experience, full stop, to the consumer? And for the older population that's seeking health span, I think they're going to get very involved in their brands. And they're really going to want to understand deeply, what's the company behind it? How much help will they provide me in using this? How can it impact my life as I tide through?
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that point about the product. It used to be, when I started out in DSM, it used to be the product was the be all and end all, and now it's just one part of a much broader approach, right? And Rob, maybe at this point, hand over to you and reflect on how you're dealing with that from your experience at ChromaDex.
Yeah, I agree with Colin's observations there. Of course, since the launch of the commercial internet since the 1990s, we've been on this trajectory. Right. We've been switching to digital. In fact, you have people who are now entering into that elderly class who have now spent 30 years being familiar with the internet. And all COVID did was exceptionally advance the progress. The Zoom is a perfect example. This call right here is a perfect example, but it proliferates throughout the dietary supplement industry. I mean, you see all these studies that are now being published first in medRxiv or bioRxiv, which previously would be delayed until there was some peer review and a publication. But now we're reading these studies early and accepting them and actually acting upon them. And the movement over to e-commerce has been shockingly slow in the dietary supplement business over the last 30 years. But now you're seeing an acceleration, sort of finally. You know, I would not be surprised if at this point Amazon is the largest seller of dietary supplements in the US. I don't know the actual number. I did have a conversation with Rick Polito at New Hope recently, and he was sharing some 2020 data that suggested that e-commerce in general was obviously had a big year in 2020, but Amazon as a portion of that was significantly higher. But across the board, you're seeing like a migration to digital and data analytics and data collection and personalization and more specification. Health and Her, which I think is a really great name, by the way. I really love that name and the idea and the niche, but an increasing number of companies that understand their consumers on a level that we never previously did. There's a greater level of data collection and analytics and understanding. So we're able to provide very specialized products. And I think the past year accelerated that. And this is across the board, telehealth, even studies themselves, like the definition of a clinic is changing. The idea, like this idea of doing a clinical study, like what is an actual clinic? Do you actually have to go visit a clinic?
Exactly.
Do a clinical study?
Exactly.
So you know, we think about this. We like to think about digital in general, and sort of in addition to the science. But of course, the focus on ChromaDex is NAD, particularly nicotinamide riboside. But there are powerful precursors NAD that we think are the next generation nicotinamide riboside. Focus of the company is NAD. There are a lot of wonderful companies out there that are studying anti-aging and health span in general, and some of these procedures we think are great, like, you know, obviously CRISPR and DNA, and there's nanotechnology and cell senescence, and we think that these areas are great. I'm sure Colin is experimenting with all of these areas and looking into all of these areas, or many of them at least. But NAD is our focus, and we like to think of ourselves as specifically that, the world's leading experts in that particular coenzyme and how to manage it and how to measure it and how to increase it and how to relate it to health. Got it.
No, thanks. And really recognize that step change that we're experiencing. And it, I mean, with today's experience, it's difficult to imagine going backwards now on e-commerce, right? It's hard to imagine that we would ever go back. from an e-commerce perspective and a digital perspective. To you, bring it back to you, your first comments about these impacts likely to be pretty sustainable. And Rob, just building on what you said, and before we go on, just want to open up or just remind the audience listening, don't be shy about sending in your questions. We would be very happy to answer any questions that you have. Meanwhile, I just want to, Rob, you said a couple of things that triggered me around, another consequence being this earlier access digitally to studies that are coming out, maybe different ways of doing clinical studies in the future. And I kind of want to switch track a little bit in the context of supplements. We've all been in the supplement industry, and this age-old question, maybe a bit provocative, but is the science good enough for supplements, right? I mean, this comes up in many different contexts. Can supplements genuinely play a role? Or, as some might be tempted to suggest, should we rather leave it to medicine? I just want to explore that a little bit. And Kate, if you don't mind, perhaps we'll start with you on this one, because clearly you're offering a pretty complex proposition. Maybe speak a little bit about your experience on the science side and getting that right.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. I think even as we've entered a category which probably hasn't had much love for a number of years, I think one of the things that really surprised us was by the time we launched our supplement range, we'd collected tens of thousands of data points from women about what their symptoms were and how severe they were. And the category in the UK in particular was very focused on one particular symptom, which we found as a bit of a red herring for menopause, which is hot flushes. It's the one that's most talked about and is the least intimate and the most obvious. But we know from our data, it's not even in the top 5 symptoms.
Wow.
And not only that, it's actually out of about 30 symptoms that we continuously track, it's almost the least severely felt from on average amongst women, for those that do suffer with it. So as we came into the category, we were just so surprised that the majority of products were just simply focusing on this one symptom. So I think what's interesting from our perspective is that the science isn't even there necessarily from a therapeutic side of things, let alone the kind of supplemental side. And I think to some extent it also does reflect the kind of lack of clinical studies in menopause as a whole, without getting into too much detail on menopause. But I think what else is interesting for us is we also do run a supportive clinic with specialist GPs. And so we do often have a discussion, quite, sometimes heated discussion with our doctors about, the science. I mean, obviously HRT is under a huge amount of scrutiny as well, around science, or at least the risk around that. So, but no, I mean, look, we as a company, try and put a lot of effort into utilizing ingredients that have a good clinical studies behind them. Unfortunately, being the stage of company that we're at, we are unable to do big studies of our own. But what we do have in abundance, again, is a way to track women over time. So there's a slightly different way of looking at things, but we can actually see how symptoms evolve for women that are using our supplements. And that's both for women that buy supplements online, but also women that are buying supplements in bricks and mortar. That's the beauty of them being able to download our app. We take that customer and have a digital relationship with them. So I think that again is a slightly new view on things in terms of how we can track the effectiveness of not only our own supplements, but also others as well.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, to think that observational studies potentially through digital can become even bigger, far bigger and participative, right, going forward, and will generate whole new data sets. I'd love to bridge over to Colin actually now as well, because Colin, I'm quite interested to sort of hear your view on the tension between, whether it's real or imagined, this tension between the medical and the supplement and, pharma and nutrition. Is it a bit of a red herring, that, or how's that evolving in your view? You've seen both sides, I think.
It's a frustrating controversy from my seat. It's kind of it's a crap dialogue in a lot of ways. but I've been dealing with it my whole career, so
Right.
it is what it is. I'm sure everybody else to a certain extent. So when we started Juvenescence, and I came in, one of the things that I really wanted to make sure was to understand kind of what is the core of this company, like what's really the heartbeat of what was going to make this company work. And we all agreed, the founders and senior team, that this was going to be a patient-centered, consumer-centered company. And I use both terms because patient is a bit more of the medical establishment's perspective, consumer is a bit more of the supplements perspective, and frankly, truth is something in between. I wish we had a better description. We call them sometimes participants. The challenge that anybody who's worked in the healthcare industry knows is that the healthcare industry, largely speaking, is based on a sick treat paradigm, right? It's how it gets paid. You have to have a disease manifest, and then you can create a therapeutic to solve the disease. And as a result, a lot of these patient consumers get left on the wayside because they're not manifesting at the point of illness, but they want to do something today. They want to take control of their health. And particularly when you're dealing with people in the subject of Healthspan, the consumer wants answers now that they can start to access. Some of those may be dietary. They may not be either medicines nor supplements. They may be food, right? But I watch companies like Yu's company, Nestlé. I think Nestlé's got the opportunity of, it's already a blockbuster, but I think Nestlé's on the right path of setting up this view of nutrition as significant a source of consumer health as anything that the entire sort of traditional medicine world has done. And the science is catching up. I think one of the things that we're all doing is we're starting to apply the same kind of biomarker discipline towards prevention and towards improvement of health that drugs have done for a long period of time. And the more that we develop these biomarkers and legitimize them so that consumers can understand, as can healthcare professionals, what really works, what really moves the needle or not, the better off it is in terms of having products that people can separate the wheat from the chaff. As the CEO of the Vitamin Shop, we had a lot of stuff on our shelves I wasn't particularly proud of, but it came with the category. But I will say one of the things that was often missed when people discuss supplements was how many actually really well-designed and scientifically supported products there were in the markets from high-quality companies. There was a tendency to lump them all together. But if you understand the category, you understand that the ones that have been the biggest winners over the longest period of time have the ones that have understood how to embrace clinical science and how to present it as a value proposition to the consumer.
Yeah, Colin, maybe just a follow-up question on that, because you triggered me again, is do you see, you mentioned Vitamin Shop before, right? And it may be somewhat, let's say, diverse at least. Is that evolving? Do you see that positively evolving?
100%.
With the okay.
I think what you're going to see is, and we started doing this during my time there a few years ago, you're going to see the need for navigators. You're going to need to see the need for not docs, because docs shouldn't do this, because it's just, they should be working on stuff that's a bit above this level. But you're seeing naturopaths that have been doing this for years. You're going to see, I think, a whole new class of healthcare professionals emerge. May come out of the dietitian and nutritionist ranks, may even come out of the fitness ranks, right? But what you're going to see is, you're going to see, I think, folks, that companies like ours, companies like Nestlé and others are going to start to want to train up and want to be the new intermediaries in nutritional health. And I think the more that we can represent and build up this presence of these folks in the overall ecosphere, the more likely it is then that DTC companies and others could take advantage of folks that are teaching consumers better ways to think about whole health, not just sort of a Western medicine, disease health driven approach.
Got it. No, thanks, Colin. Really, really nice insights. And I'd like to sort of, you mentioned Nestlé, and I think it'd be great, if we could hear from your side, pretty unique situation at Nestlé, where you have this juxtaposition of, classical food and beverage, but also, Nestlé Health Science, where you're active. How do you reconcile those two in the overall context of science and health span?
Yeah. So first, I would just want to build on what Colin just said. I think there's a lot of collaboration opportunity between the pharma and the nutrition side. Within Nestlé Health Science, we are committed to evidence generation, evidence-based nutrition. And certainly we don't have the budget like big pharma to do very, very expensive clinical trials. But what we did is we hired people from pharma, and we also collaborate with healthcare professionals who are really familiar with clinical trial design and the disease areas, and try to kind of design pragmatic trials that have the right endpoints, have the right biomarkers, tied to the science, linked to the clinical benefits, and do a trial that smells like pharma but doesn't have the expense of a typical pharma trial. So and that is a core competency that we are building as a company, because that's how we show the evidence of our product, the credibility, and eventually it's going to benefit us. The more credibility we can demonstrate, the more we will benefit from it. We want to be on the right side of the clinical evidence. There's a lot of studies outside our arena, our internal company. We can only do limited studies, but there's a lot of science outside our company that we study, and we want to be aligned with those science and design product accordingly. So I think I'm a kind of glass half full type of person. I see a lot of progress in science, in nutrition, in supplements, not only in terms of generation of new science, but also communication and education in this area. And the healthcare professionals are clearly more engaged on nutrition and supplements. I came back from some of the medical conferences, and the nutrition sessions sometimes have more people than the drug sessions, right? That's very, very encouraging. I think there's just increased alignment and recognition that the traditional pharma model, reactive model, treating for symptoms, is not going to be sustainable. And the opportunity is in the holistic management of health, and certainly prevention of diseases. And this is where I think nutrition and supplement can play a much bigger role. We see a lot of opportunity in this area.
Yeah, thanks, you. And it's very promising to hear that, your experience of the medical conference. I mean, you always hear these stories. It used to be years ago in med school, you'd have literally like one afternoon about nutrition in a 5-year medical course, right? But from what you're saying, that maybe is starting to change, and maybe the mindset is starting to evolve. Rob, I mean, from your perspective, you've talked quite passionately also in your introduction about the science behind your portfolio. Would you mind sharing a little bit of how important that's been just for the overall success of your strategy as well? I mean, how have you experienced that? What was the science there right at the beginning, or what was it really a conscious effort to try and put that in place?
Science was there early. I mean, the anti-aging scientific community really blossomed beginning in the 1990s with research, stem cell research relating to telomeres, and that pivoted into sirtuins and resveratrol, and then pivoted over to this NAD research, and then all of a sudden the emergence called nitrogen, which has a big impact on NAD, and unlike those other things, the scientific that's emerged thus far is supportive of the idea that if you elevate NAD, you're going to age better. But regulations and regulatory bodies are there for a reason. The dietary supplement business, as everybody here knows, is not immune to bad behavior. There are too many companies that operate in the dietary supplement business who really don't give a heck about people's health. It's as an individual who's worked in many industries, I find it somewhat, on one hand, not surprising the more I get to know human beings in general, but shocking, since the people were gravitated towards this business of improving people's health, yet the amount of misrepresentation of the science or non-science is surprising to me, or theft of other people's science is shocking to me. But at the core, A molecule is a molecule, whether it's a food or a drug or a dietary supplement. And if you have a molecule that has an impact, the important thing is for that to be proven as best we can possibly prove it and communicated. Because if you have an opportunity to improve people's health, whether it's for a specific indication or whether it's for aging in general, don't we have an obligation to get it out there? I think so.
Sorry, I was on mute, and yes, Rob, I was just agreeing with you.
Yeah.
And you know, you said this, an interesting statement, right, about almost have an obligation to get it out there, and that's really a follow-up question that I have for you as a panel. Is we've established, you know, it's clear, I think we knew that, but it's good to go through it, the importance of the science, but how do we collectively, what more do we need to do to raise that awareness, both on the regulatory side? Okay, we got a lot of questions in an earlier panel today about the role of the regulatory authorities. Are they sufficiently up to date and keeping pace with the pace of change? So from the regulatory side, but also just from a communication and awareness side for consumers. It's a very open question, but you know, how do we, Rob, to your point, and maybe stick with you if you don't mind, but how do we get that science out there? How do we get it to resonate, make sure that it's credible, and all the rest of it?
I think it's a major challenge, and the regulatory bodies aren't even close to keeping up with the state of technology. Not even so much the state of the science, the state of technology. Consumers are taking dietary supplements, they're experiencing the benefits, and then they're communicating with themselves online.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So the truth is getting known with or without the regulatory bodies, and they're essentially endeavoring to keep up with that, with that fact. So there is evolution or revolution that needs to take place here in order to help consumers learn what's going to, in fact, help them or hurt them.
Yeah, it's probably a great segue back to Kate actually on that, right? You know, it almost with the digital platforms now and product offerings that almost can take on a life of its own. How have you experienced that?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one. I think you tend to, I mean, it's I suppose difficult in a way not to look at repeat rates is something that we get really excited about, because I mean it's a great measure of how well is this supplement actually doing for this customer, and looking at that as a whole. And I know that sounds so rudimentary, but it just you know, sometimes that's all you've got to kind of work with regards to response from customers. And I think someone made a really good comment in the chat about working with your suppliers, which is exactly the position that we're in as a non-big company. That's what we're really keen to do. And I think that's the critical point for us, and we do talk to customers about the kind of clinically proven ingredients and discuss that as part of our story. So but yeah, I think I still believe that tech has and data has a huge part to play, and I think particularly around understanding from customers what works for them. I think the other difficulty that we have within the sector that I work in, sorry to dwell on menopause a lot, but is, and I'm sure it exists in other therapeutic areas as well, is the complexity of each individual, and the personalization is so critical, that actually what we think is happening is, for some women these things work really, really well, and for others they don't, and it all depends on things like their symptoms, the symptom severity, their menopausal type, I mean so many different variables. And so I think that for us is where the kind of holy grail is, I think, is taking the personalization, understanding, almost crowdsourcing that information to a point that's statistically significant, and then feeding it back to customers based on who they are and what's worked for other people just like them.
And Kate, you mentioned, you know, I think you said you had like a database or data set from over 100,000 women. I mean, it's just surely an incredible opportunity and an incredible resource, right? And we talked about clinical trials being completely different in the future. So how do you manage that? What's been a little bit your journey on all of that data and what to do with it?
Yeah, and it was a bit of a surprise to us, to be honest. I think we started off very much being an e-commerce platform. We wanted to understand what women wanted. So we sold a number of third-party brands and sourced the best of what we could find around the world. But in order to allow women to navigate their own personal journey, we added this basic symptom tool to the website. And very quickly, we found that had such high take-up that we almost evolved overnight into a data company alongside, or a data hub alongside an e-commerce company.
Amazing.
And yeah, that was the impetus for us to then develop that into an app and provide a much a tech product that has much more longevity for the customer. Obviously, much improves our relationship with the customer as well. Yeah, so and we're really excited about the data and what it can do, and we've got some really exciting projects on the horizon for taking it to a few more steps further. But yeah, it's a really important part of what we do, and I definitely see that I suppose this kind of model would work in so many other categories as well.
Great, yeah, thanks, Kate. Really appreciate the insight. So,
Hey, James.
Yeah, please.
One other just quick comment, which is, I think, I've been banging around the supplement industry for most of my career. And one of the things I've observed, in particular when you get to these conferences, is the supplement industry often talks about science as something that they can't define, that they accept the definition of science that is put forward by, pharma or by other parts of the industry. In our industry, we are a demand-driven industry.
Yeah.
In other words, the end user is making a choice to reach into their wallet and purchase this product, right?
Very true.
To a certain extent, science is a communication challenge as much as it is a proof challenge in this industry. And I can name a number of brands. Actually, Used Company has acquired a few of them recently, and I know they're going to successfully grow them more. But there are brands, Garden of Life comes to mind as one of the ones now over at Nestlé, that has embraced science, but they've embraced the science of quality. They've embraced the science of the label, and they've created a community of followers who are, absolutely crazy about that brand because they understand that the quality story that sits behind it is as important as any clinical study as anything can do. So I think what we need to do as an industry is we need to broaden our definition of science and understand that it's a tool. It's not like, it's not black or white. It's a piece of the puzzle to get more people to join the supplement industry on the right terms, not the crap terms that Rob talked about earlier that unfortunately a lot of the false purveyors put out there.
Yeah, no, really good. It's not only about an RCT, it's so much broader than that, indeed. Colin, thanks, really appreciate that comment. And now in panel, in the interest of time, right, I would love to sort of continue probing on this, but we only got another few minutes. So I want to leave, this is where my job as a facilitator is very easy. I have one last question to ask you. It's a very easy question to ask. It's a fairly obvious question. I recognize it's a much more difficult one to answer, but I'll throw it out to you anyway. From your perspective, with your experience, we've had a lot of changes coming through, particularly in the last year and a half. In the next 5 years, what's going to be the next big change? What would you be betting on in the next 5 years in terms of how the industry is evolving? And maybe we'll start with you first on that.
Sure. I think the future is very exciting. The consumers around the world are increasingly aware of the importance of health and wellness and looking for new solutions. I think there's going to be more demand for natural and clean products. I buy a lot of products from supermarkets, from stores, not because I like them, because I don't have better alternatives. So from a new product design perspective, thinking about a better version of what people consume today is a great opportunity. I think sustainability will become more and more front and center, and especially with the Gen Zs and the millennials, there will definitely be more personalization, not only in terms of product offering, but also in the marketing and communication, the messaging and the storytelling tailored to the specific consumer segments, personalized and semi-personalized product offerings, and the digital analytics that allow us to better understand the consumer behavior and communicate and engage them accordingly. I think there's going to be emergence of newer formats beyond the traditional approaches like pills. You guys know the gummies are. My family consume a lot of vitamins, but today we eat a lot of gummies. We don't eat pills anymore. It's a gummy that the kids, the parents, they can all eat together, and the chips and crackers and all kinds of innovative formats that better integrate with the lifestyle.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very exciting going forward.
I totally agree. Sorry if there's a bit of background noise going on here. I'm sitting in the kitchen at the moment, so apologise if you're hearing in background noise. Rob, from your perspective, the next big thing or the big changes to watch out for in the next 5 years?
Well, in the long term, I think humans as a species are going to solve the problem of aging and health span. I think this is a problem that we are going to cure. But in the short run, in the short term, but that solution is likely to be a complex solution that involves DNA manipulation, technology, artificial intelligence. But in the short term, I think dietary supplements can play a role in impacting the way the body ages. We've already shown that if you eat a restricted diet, very few calories, and you exercise a lot, you will age better. But we've also identified certain molecules, and I think obviously niacin, nicotinamide riboside is one of them, that if you take on a regular basis improves the way the body ages. And I think that's significant from a science standpoint. From a business standpoint, I think obviously it's fairly obvious we're getting dramatically more in an age of data. So it's more of direct communication with the consumers, understanding their specific needs and providing a product that they want, and being able to communicate directly with them. All companies will have to be, like Health and Her, data companies. All companies will have to be data companies, and those that choose not to be data companies will probably not be companies eventually.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And then in terms of regulatory, I think that the technology is taking care of that. I think that the related to the accumulation and analysis of the data is what we're learning is the truth. The consumers are telling us what the truth is.
Yeah.
So Bache was written like in '92 or something, before the internet even became a thing.
It's amazing.
And the regulations that exist in place today actually disincent certain dietary supplement companies to actually invest in the science, which is why you have a proliferation of dietary supplement companies that are nothing more than just marketing engines. There's really nothing behind it other than that, and a part of that is systemic. And I think you'll see an evolution of that, like a necessary evolution of that, and companies having to embrace the science in order to and have a real scientific investment in order to sustain. I think that'll increase over the next 5 years.
Very good, thanks. Thank you so much. So we're a little bit tight on time, but maybe just a few additional words from Kate and Colin. Kate, over to you.
Yeah, I think all the ideas have already been covered by Rob and you, but the only one I think from my perspective is absolutely the rise of tech and apps alongside supplements for sure. But also I think beyond that, perhaps looking at the science of the two we use in combination, which is really interesting for us, obviously, and how that compares to even medicines or hormones in our particular instance. So yeah, I think there's definitely going to be a lot more of that type of activity across all different categories.
Great, thanks, Kate. And
I mean,
Colin,
my final comment would be, I remember meeting with Faith Popcorn right after 9/11 occurred, and one of the things that happened was, in the United States in particular, a huge upswing in home security sales, huge upswing in home improvement sales, in part because we all started cocooning because we were scared. I think COVID is going to have a long-term ripple effect. And I think part of it is people are going to want to take more control of their health than ever before. And I think what we're going to see is people searching for information, searching for expertise, and then searching ultimately for control. I think the supplement industry has an opportunity, some of the supplement industry, to step forward and be a source of security, a source of community, and ultimately provide a source of control back to the consumer at a time when all of us have felt like we've been out of control for the last year plus going through this COVID crisis.
Fantastic, Colin. Thank you. That brings us nicely full circle as well to our point of departure earlier on. So really appreciate that. Panel, thank you so much for your super insights and interactivity. Angela, I'll hand it quickly back to you for a very short closing comments, I think.
And I'll say thank you very much, James, for a wonderful facilitation. And of course, thanks for the panel for your time tonight. I could have listened to another hour, which I suppose is disappointing, but the mark of a good session. Thanks, of course, to our audience for being so interactive. Great to see so many questions and comments from you all. If we didn't get to your questions, please feel free to reach out to the panel directly using the partnering system. I'm sure they'd be happy to connect. But in the meantime, I'll let you get on with your day. We have another really interesting session coming up, looking at how some of the big food companies are adapting and investing in this emerging health and wellness space. So do stick around for that. But in the meantime, I will say thank you very much once again to our panel, and goodbye.